this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I am delighted to welcome Ari Berman, who is the national correspondent for voting rights for Mother Jones, the author of multiple books on voting, and he had the good sense to marry our culture vulture, Meredith Blake. Welcome, Ari.
Hey, Jen, great to see you. And thank you for hiring
Well,
my wife.
oh, she is an absolute superstar, as you know. So let's talk Texas. These districts were already gerrymandered, correct? They don't, as we currently sit, represent either racially or from a partisan standpoint, the true makeup of Texas. And this plan would make it worse. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Texas already is heavily gerrymandered. If you look at what happened, 95% of the population growth in the last decade in Texas came from communities of color. But when Republicans drew new districts after the 2020 census, they drew districts that gave more representation to white Republicans instead. So they basically were able to forestall a decade of demographic changes. Then this unprecedented mid-decade redistricting would make that worse. It would further the number of majority white districts in the state. It would dismantle districts held by Democrats of color, places like Al Green's district in Houston, Greg Casar's district in Austin. And so Texas has basically violated the Voting Rights Act every single redistricting cycle since the Voting Rights Act was passed. And they're doing the same thing now in a bid to try to increase the number of seats for the GOP.
Now, the Supreme Court kind of opened the door for these people to run through when it held that, well, you can't gerrymander according to race, but you can for partisanship, which is kind of doublespeak because traditionally, at least in the modern era, non-white voters tend to vote for Democrats in heavier numbers. Did that kind of set off a free-for-all that puts us where we are right now?
It did. It allowed states like Texas to basically camouflage racial gerrymandering with partisan gerrymandering. And it basically opened the door to the kind of brazen gerrymanders that Trump wants Republicans to do in Texas, because the Supreme Court said that not only can you not strike down this kind of partisan gerrymandering, federal courts can't even review these kind of claims. And that was just an incredibly radical decision that really opened the floodgates. And Texas Republicans have been very open about what they're doing. They're basically saying, we drew these districts based on partisan performance. We're doing this to give more seats to Republicans. Now, the Department of Justice had a letter that said that districts in Texas, 4 districts that were all represented by Black and Hispanic Democrats, were unconstitutional racial gerrymanders. So they were trying to make a Voting Rights Act argument, a very legally dubious one, but an argument under the Voting Rights Act. Texas Republicans just brushed that aside and basically said, we don't care what the DOJ said. We did this for political reasons, and that's legal according to the Supreme Court. Now, we'll see whether it is legal, but they believe that they're emboldened by what the Supreme Court has done.
Now, we have this kind of standoff right now because enough Democrats have left the state, what they call breaking quorum, to deprive the Republicans of moving forward on this map. Yesterday, we had this really astounding situation in which the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who has been threatening to declare these people to have abandoned, had been making statements, giving them till Friday to return. The governor races into the Texas Supreme Court. He files a suit. Paxton says, no, the governor doesn't have authority to do this. Only I have authority to do this. How do you think the legal part of this is going to wash out before we get to the politics of it all?
Well, the legal experts I've been talking to don't believe that Republicans will succeed here. It's very difficult to expel Democrats or any member of the legislature from office. They basically have to show that Democrats aren't performing their duties, and Democrats are going to argue that this is part of their duties, that their constituents want them to resist this power grab, and that's what they're doing. They don't have to be in the state of Texas to be able to do it. The Attorney General would have to file lawsuits in every district represented by Texas Democrats. We'd have to go to 51 districts or more and try to do this, which I think is going to be difficult to get courts to do in any kind of time. The governor is kind of going for a Hail Mary here, asking the Texas Supreme Court to do this. Now, the Texas Supreme Court is all Republican. It's very partisan, so I don't want to predict what they might do. But I think that nobody really believes that they're on constitutional ground here because breaking quorum is part of the Texas Constitution. It's been done before. It's been done dating back to 1870. And so I think that just a lot of smoke and hot air is coming out from Texas Republicans, but I don't think much of it is grounded in the actual law.
And meanwhile, just to get in on the MAGA politics of it all, Senator Cornyn, who is facing a primary challenge from none other than Ken Paxton, announced he wants the FBI to go arrest these people. On what basis, possible basis, would there be a federal criminal charge that would support arresting these people?
Well, they're trying to make this argument that because the Democrats are being fined $500 a day for breaking quorum, which were new rules passed by Texas Republicans in 2021 after the last quorum break, that by accepting money to pay off those fines, that would somehow amount to bribery. Now, I think that's very much a stretch, that argument. But yeah, I mean, it's alarming that Cornyn is calling on the FBI to get involved. It's extremely alarming. It's also alarming that Trump said the FBI might have to get involved. So we don't know how this is going to play out, but any use of federal law enforcement in this kind of state context, when Democrats are just doing their jobs, would be an escalation of the authoritarian tactics we've already seen. I do think there's some level of, as you mentioned, primary politics at play. Both Cornyn and Paxton are running against each other. So they're both going to try to get as extreme as possible because they're in a Republican primary. So I think sometimes you have to separate what is legal from what they're actually saying. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about the Texas Attorney General who's already been impeached. We're talking about a president of the United States that's been impeached twice. I mean, I don't think we can really trust these people to adhere to the law in any of these contexts.
Such a cynic, such a cynic, makes you a good contrarian. Um, let's talk a little bit about the politics of this. In speaking to some Texas lawyers and some people on the ground, they say that this move is not really popular, even with Republicans, that they have a sense that this is a Bigfoot move from DC, don't mess with Texas. And they're very upset that the special session has been called to deal with this and not with, for example, the aftermath of that horrific flood and the deaths of all of those young girls. Is this ultimately going to be decided on the politics of it rather than on the law, that Republicans there are going to have to decide whether this is a loser for them and to kind of figure out a way to back off? Is that where we should kind of keep our focus rather than on the courts?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean that is, however, part of the reason they're gerrymandering is to try to insulate themselves from any kind of accountability. But yes, I mean this is an obvious power grab. When Trump comes out and says, "I'm entitled to five seats in Texas," I think everyone sees what this is really about. And this is still risky. I mean, the way they've drawn these maps is that they have drawn five new districts that Trump carried by 10 points or more. So they're trying to insulate themselves from the voters. That said, that's based on 2024 data, which was not a good year for Democrats. If you look back at 2020, if you look back at 2018, when Beto O'Rourke ran a close race against Ted Cruz, these districts are more competitive that they're drawing. So there could be a backlash that let's just say the map passes and let's just say the courts uphold it, which is probably what's going to ultimately happen. Then the question is, can Democrats run strong campaigns against the people that are holding now these gerrymandered seats and make this an issue? And it's very possible they could, tied into all the other unpopular things that Trump is doing. I mean, I still think these elections are going to be decided by things like the cost of living, right? The effort to kick people off of healthcare, all the things that people don't like about what Trump is doing. But I think this just magnifies the sense that, Trump is out for himself as opposed to being out for the everyday person. And certainly this kind of power grab exacerbates that kind of situation.
Now, the governors of New York and California have said we're going to fight fire with fire. How easy or difficult is it for them to engage in the same kind of mid-decade redistricting? And if they could, how many seats do you think they could conceivably squeeze out that might equal or even overwhelm the Texas 5 seats that the Republicans are trying to come up with?
It's not as easy as it is in Texas because both New York and California have independent redistricting commissions. So they have to somehow get around those. In New York, where I live, they can't do it in one cycle. They have to get a constitutional amendment to change the redistricting commission. So they're not going to be able to put new maps in place before the 2026 midterms. California has a better shot. They're basically coming up with a plan where the legislature would redraw the lines only mid-decade so they wouldn't usurp the power of the independent commission for the next decade. And then the governor would then ask the voters to approve it. Now, that's risky because the voters have to approve it. If this map was put to a vote in Texas, the voters probably wouldn't approve it. So they have to make an argument in California that basically says, listen, we know that gerrymandering is wrong. We don't like it, but we have no choice but to do this to try to offset what Texas is doing and make the race for Congress more fair. Because right now, the elections are going to be skewed if Texas does it with no response. And so California could argue quite plausibly that, yeah, we're trying to redistrict for political advantage, but we're doing it in the name of fairness ultimately. And we are going to get back, if we get power again, we're going to try to tackle this issue. But the idea is that they could pick up 5 more seats, possibly more. I think that's probably the best bet for Democrats because other blue states either have similar constraints or they don't have as many seats that they could possibly pick up. So California is probably the best bet. The worrying thing here, Jen, though, is if California does do this, then other red states are going to respond. And we're already seeing that. JD Vance is going to Indiana, Missouri's talking about it, Florida's talking about it, Ohio's moving forward with it. So this is not the end. It's not like it's Texas versus California. It's going to be Texas versus California plus a whole lot of other red states. And so Republicans could squeeze a number of new seats out of here. And really, this whole thing is just so abnormal. This is yet another way that Trump has normalized something that is totally out of character with how redistricting normally works.
Absolutely. It is noteworthy that one of the nervous Republicans in California has introduced a bill in Congress to say no more mid-decade redistricting. It suggests that those Republicans who might be affected might be a little bit nervous about this, which suggests that maybe there is some cold feet developing out there. Last question for you, Ari. You've been an advocate. I've been an advocate of redistricting reform, of having gerrymandering abolished, having neutral lines drawn by a commission subject to legal review. But that only works if both sides are kind of playing in the same zip code, let alone on the same field. In your view, is this an appropriate response for Democrats? It's hard to see that they can do anything else without really tying their own hands behind their back.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an appropriate response politically, and I think it's an appropriate response to try to make the race for the House more fair. I ultimately worry that a gerrymandering arms race is going to lead to a race to the bottom, and that
Right.
people in both red and blue states are going to suffer. And that's ultimately why I think there should be national legislation banning this kind of gerrymandering. And remember, Jen, there was a push for this that Democrats made
Yes.
in Congress when Biden was president, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. This would have banned this kind of partisan gerrymandering. Every Democrat but 3 voted for it. Every Republican voted against it. And so I think that's the appropriate way to do this, where every state is treated equally, because right now it's not fair if places like Texas can just gerrymander at will, but blue states are trying to adhere to fairness. In the name of fairness, the political system gets more skewed as a result. So I think that's an untenable status quo, but I worry about where we're headed, where it's sort of tit for tat gerrymandering. It's hard to see how that ends up in a good place for American democracy.
Absolutely. And so, like so many other things, this involves not only the overall Trump corruption of our political system, a Supreme Court that has winked and nod at power grabs by the partisans who appointed them, and really whether the power of public opinion still matters and can still overcome this. So it's a fascinating development. And frankly, it's kind of scary because we're talking about permanently rigging the electoral system, which a lot of Americans have frankly lost faith in. So thank you so much, Ari. You almost measure up to Meredith, who is hard to measure up to. But in all seriousness, thank you so much for your expertise. We'll have you back again as we kind of watch this play out. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jen. And yeah, she's always my better half.